it's really nice to be back here every year on her, in her old stomping grounds. So I'm here to chat with you a little bit more, yes, about UNC, but I know that not everyone in the room may be interested in UNC Chapel Hill, so I'm really here to talk with you a bit more about approaching the college application process and things to think about now that will prepare you for that application process as you go into this next year, for either your senior year, if you're the student in the room, or for parents for your student's senior year. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And there are a few things to think about as you're approaching this process. I've been in admissions long enough, I think, that I can hopefully offer some good advice. I'm one of the senior, I didn't introduce myself, I'm one of the senior assistant directors. Hi, I've been in Chapel Hill in the admissions office for about 8 years now. I went there for undergrad and stayed for grad school and started working there. So I'm every parent's first nightmare. I went to college and I never left. So hello, that's who I am. I've read thousands of applications. I've worked with literally tens of thousands of families as they go through this process. And it's a real joy and a real treat to get to work with you all as you are considering whether or not UNC might be a good fit for you. So, in thinking about the college application process, first and foremost, students, if you are in the room, think about what it will take for you to be successful when you go off to college. When you go off to college, mom and dad will not be there, right? You've already heard this a little bit. Mom and dad will be at home, probably having a tall glass of wine, celebrating the fact that you are no longer there. Or they'll be crying in their bedrooms tomorrow morning, the fact that you are no longer there because they just love their baby so much. Either response is perfectly appropriate, parents. So students, this is your journey, right? This is your story. And your parents understand that. I mean, parents, you know what it was like. You got to create your own path. Maybe you went to the same school as your parents. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you did something entirely different. Maybe you were the first in your family to go to college and you didn't have any help. You probably had to be a self-advocate and do that on your own. And your kids are getting ready to go through that process too, which is really exciting. And I can also understand it can be really scary. But the first thing to remember is that students, this is your process. So this is when mom and dad are beginning to fade into the background and you are really taking over for yourself. You're really taking responsibility for your actions. You are going to be the one who is filling out the application. And parents, please let your students do that. You're welcome to offer advice. There's nothing wrong with you being involved in this process. I do want to make sure that that is very clear. You're welcome to support. We hope that you do support your child as they go through this process. We hope that you're there for them. We hope that you have honest conversations with them about what might be a reasonable fit for an institution. Students, your parents are not going to tell you what to do and when to do it, though. That is going to be your responsibility. Things to keep in mind. I had a parent call me last week pretending to be their daughter. And I thought, I don't know with 100% certainty, but I can tell from the cadence of your voice and the way you keep saying she, I, that you are definitely the mom, right? It's funny, yeah. After I hung up, I sat there for a minute and I thought, that was so bizarre. And I went and told my colleagues and they said, oh yeah, that's all happened to us before. And I hadn't had it happen to me for a few years, which is why I was just struck. I've been the lucky one. It's also troubling when we get phone calls at 10:30 in the morning when the student is in school and we know there's no teacher work day or anything that day, and the parent says, okay, so I'm on the part of the application where we're writing the essays, and I'm trying to figure out such and such and such and such, right? It is not your application, parents. And parents, you already know this, but students do know that the parents, your parents know that this is not your application, or their application, right? This is yours. So be prepared to handle that on your own. And it's a big step, and it's part of the going away process. Same thing goes for getting to know counselors and getting to know your teachers. It's really uncomfortable when I have to read a letter, and I haven't had that from Green Hope yet, but I have from plenty of other schools very similar to Green Hope, where the counselor says, I couldn't tell you very much about this student, but let me tell you all about their mother, or let me tell you all about their father, because they're the only person I've met, but I've actually never met the student. And parents, yes, sometimes you have to go in and meet with the counselor, right? That's perfectly understandable. So that's not to say that you are not allowed to reach out. So please don't misunderstand me as I say all of this. But students, if your teachers are evaluating you and the only experience your teacher has had is when your mom called because you got an 89.5 and the teacher wouldn't round it up to an A, and that's what they can write about in their letter of recommendation, that's a problem, right? So thinking about preparing yourself, one, and two, what that means for your character. And what that means for your level of preparation to go off to college and whether or not you're the type of student that we want in the classroom. When parents call me when their kids are juniors at UNC, I hang up the phone. I'm not going to talk to you, right? Your student's an adult. And so again, parents, you know, the students, I'm saying this because I want you to be prepared because that moment is here. So it is time. So the parents know what I'm talking about, but students, now is the time to go ahead and begin letting go and taking that responsibility, which is really scary. I remember what that was like doing that myself, but it's also very exciting. Other things to think about as you're approaching the college application process, when you're putting together your list, make sure that you're including schools that are reasonable within reach. Your counselors do a great job about talking about schools that might be a really good fit for you academically, that might also be a really good match for you socially, and so on and so forth. Also be sure to have honest conversations together as a family about what your family can reasonably afford. Right? Don't apply to a school just because you think you won't be able to afford it, because you never know what financial aid will give you. But do have those conversations up front. This is an important time to begin talking about that, because the last thing you want to do is apply to a whole bunch of schools. You're not going to be eligible for financial aid, but your family's not willing to pay for that, and then you're stuck in this situation where you've gotten into a whole bunch of great schools and you're going to be saddled with debt. Right? So that's another thing to think about as you're approaching the process and getting ready to apply to college. So in terms of things that colleges are looking for and what that means for you or your students now in junior year. You saw the list up there, the colleges we're looking at. I think that's a great list, so we're going to talk about a lot of those things. First and foremost, when universities are reviewing an application, oftentimes one of the very first things they see will be your transcript or your student's transcript, so the academic record of that student. And I'll talk about decisions that you can get and so on and so forth a little bit later on. Your transcript or your student's transcript is going to be very important because that shows us, one, the courses that you've decided to take based on what was available to you at your school, and two, how you ended up performing in them. Universities want to make sure that you can handle the coursework at their institution. For example, UNC is one of the top 5 public universities in the United States. It's a top 30 university overall. We're within the 0.1% of universities in the world. If you are a straight F student, you're probably not going to do well at UNC. None of you in this room are straight F students, so all of you are going to be fine, right? Green Hope is a wonderfully strong school and a school that wonderfully prepares your students to go off to college. But looking at that academic record is going to be key to our review. We want to make sure that students are prepared. UNC specifically is very lucky in the sense that almost all of our applicants are academically prepared and would be just fine if they applied to UNC. Which is why, and if we were to admit them, which is why everything else comes into play. But thinking about your transcript, the schools are really looking at the courses you took and the grades you got, which I already mentioned. For coursework, I do want to have a quick note about rigor. A lot of people say, take the most APs you possibly can. The more APs you take, the better your application will look, the more competitive you'll be, the more likely you will be to get into such and such school or whatever it is. And more is not necessarily better. I want to make sure that that is very clear. UNC actually did a study several years ago where we looked at the number of college-level courses a student took when they were in high school, whether it was AP, IB, dual enrollment, whatever it was. And the first-year GPA of those students at UNC, because the College Board says that the more of these courses you take, the more well-prepared you'll be for success and the better you'll do in college. So we decided, all right, let's take a look. Let's see if that's really the case. We found if you took one AP, IB, dual enrollment, college level, whatever it may be, one of these top courses, you had a higher GPA at UNC than if you had taken none. 2, higher than if you had taken 1. 3, higher than if you had taken 2. 4, higher than 3. 5, higher than 4. And then we found it leveled off. So if you took 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 college level courses, your first year GPA at UNC Chapel Hill was about the same. Then it began to drop. Because you're exhausted. Don't take 22 AP classes, live your life. Do something. Go out, laugh at yourself, laugh at your friends, breathe, scrape your knee, do something, right? Something that is different that will get other creative juices flowing, or if you're not the creative type, anything, zone out for a minute, whatever it may be, right? So, in our eyes, you don't have to get necessarily to 5. We do a holistic review, and a lot of institutions do a holistic review. However, many students are getting to that point. The applicant pool is going to be full of students that have these great courses. But once you get to a certain number of those AP courses, 4, 5, 6 or so, that student, in terms of rigor and whether or not they're going to be successful at Carolina, is about on the same playing field as a student who has 10. All right? So if you, as a student, are sitting there thinking, okay, I have 7, or I've got 8, but I've got to get in 3 more, so that way I look really good. It's actually a wash when you apply to Carolina. And if you add in those 3 more courses, right, you want to make sure you have a strong senior year. That is another thing. You want to have the most rigorous course load in your senior year. You don't want to back off. But if you took, I don't know, 3 or 4 in your junior year, and you want to take 3 or 4 in your senior year, that's fine. You don't need to take 7. You don't need to take 8. Okay? Especially if adding those extra courses means that all of your grades are going to go from A's to B's, or B's to C's, or whatever it may be. So take strong courses, challenge yourself, but you got to remember that you got to do well in those courses, right? Universities will be looking at that, and that is going to be very important. The reason why your performance in these courses matters so much to institutions is because AP or IB or dual enrollment, that's college level. Oftentimes the universities that students at this institution, at this school are applying to are top colleges. So college level, top college level. Right? If you're not doing well, if you're getting straight C's in every single AP class, the more and more selective the institution is, the more and more worried they're going to be about whether or not you can handle even harder rigor when you get to their institution. So I realize that this all makes sense to many of you. This also is very good for everyone to hear again, though, which is why I'm repeating it and going through this. So that matters. Mostly A's is what UNC Chapel Hill is looking for. You don't have to have straight A's. If you've got more than just a couple B's, that's okay. When you're getting into a lot of B's, you're getting into where you're getting a couple C's, even if you have a lot of A's, but you have some C's on your record, that's when things begin to get shaky. A lot of times people will ask me about transcripts in relation to GPAs and class rank as well. And at some universities, a GPA and a class rank really matter. For example, in the state of Texas, if you go to a Texas school and you're in the top 7%, it is now, you're automatically given admission, granted admission to the University of Texas, right? Everyone who falls below that top 7% are then individually reviewed. And it depends from state to state. It depends from school to school. Some institutions say you must be in the top 10%. Other institutions say you must have a 4.5 weighted GPA on a 4-point scale. Some institutions do that. Other institutions don't care what your GPA is here, but they're going to take all of your courses and all of your grades and put your coursework on their internal GPA scale and recalculate your GPA to something that they then use. That matters. Or Emory University, for example, they recalculate GPAs. So that's something to think about, right, as you're looking at all these different things. At UNC Chapel Hill, we actually don't focus on your class rank or your GPA. That is not to say you can be ranked in the bottom 3 people in your class and be admitted, right? That's different. So we don't focus necessarily on the GPA because that's one number. It doesn't really tell us very much about the types of courses you chose to take. You might have a 4.7 GPA and be next to someone else with a 4.7 GPA, and this person took 2 APs and you took 5, or this person took several honors courses and were able to get their GPA bumped up, whatever it may be. I've also seen students with identical courses and grades at 2 different schools, and they have 2 completely different GPAs because their schools weigh GPAs differently, right? Which is why, specifically at UNC and at many institutions, they're not really going to focus so much on the GPA, and then your class rank is often based on that GPA. A lot of folks will also ask me about quotas and how that comes into play, and I want to talk about quotas now because it relates back to this. A lot of people believe that there is a quota for Green Hope, or that there is a quota for Wake County, or a quota for just Cary, or whatever it may be. None of that's actually true. So there is no quota for Green Hope High School. There is no quota for Wake County. The only quota we have is that 82% of the enrolling first-year class must come from the state of North Carolina. 18% can come from the other 49 states, the US territories, and the rest of the world. So that's it. If every student who applies from Green Hope this year is going to be among the strongest in the overall North Carolina applicant pool, every student will be admitted. If every student who applies from Green Hope this year is not among the best in the overall North Carolina applicant pool, none of them will be admitted. And we have that freedom and that flexibility. No, we are not required to bring in a student from every county. In fact, many years we don't. Some years counties don't send us applicants. Other years some counties don't send us a competitive applicant at all. Right? So I've gotten calls. I got a call from someone at Green Hope 3 years ago asking if they should move just south of Raleigh, further away, so that way their kid could get in, because the kid would definitely be the valedictorian at that high school, but here they're ranked number 30. please don't move. Stay here. You're in a great high school, right? Your students are going to be very well prepared after going through a school like this one, all right? So you please do not feel like you need to uproot your entire family just for a college admissions decision. And if you're feeling that way, please come talk to me. We'll have a separate session together. So that's a different conversation. So all of that is related to academics. There's one other academic component I haven't mentioned yet. That does play a factor for some institutions, and that's a test score, either the SAT or the ACT. Some schools are test optional, so that means that when you apply, they're not going to require that you send in an SAT or an ACT score. You're welcome to send it in if you'd like to. Some schools, there are lots of different types of test optional schools. Some schools say you don't have to send in an SAT or ACT score, but you do have to send in SAT2s instead, or you need to send in AP exam scores, or early IB scores, or predicted marks, or whatever it may be. At UNC, we are not test optional. We do require the SAT or the ACT. These tests are measuring the potential for how a student will do during their very first year on a college campus. That's what the tests are measuring. They are not measuring IQ. They are not measuring intelligence. I have seen people score a perfect 1600 on the SAT or a 36 on the ACT. I see this every year. And they're a straight B and C student in high school because they don't want to put in the work. Why on earth would I want to bring in someone brilliant who's wasting their potential? Right? I don't have a good reason to do that. No college does. And then I've seen students who have straight A's in a full IB diploma program or a full AP program, they're the student body president, they're doing all this great stuff, whatever it may be, and a standardized test is just a funky thing. And they're not as great at taking a standardized test. And being a North Carolina resident, you all are in the North Carolina applicant pool, your kids are, and we have a little bit more space. Now that said, we often will not admit students who are falling exceptionally in an exceptionally low range, all right? The lowest you can score on a section, I think, is 250 now, it might be 200. It goes up to 800. If you're scoring 250 and 250 on the two sections, you don't meet the UNC system minimum, right? And we will not be able to admit you. For many of you in here, that will not be the case. All right, but if you are within the range and a great student, that's okay. The reason why our average is what it is because there's someone above and below that, right? So testing matters. It's not going to be the end-all, be-all. It is rarely the reason why we make a decision up or down, whichever way, but it is a factor that we consider. So for your students, they should do the absolute best job that they can, but I would not, if they got a 32 on the ACT, and a school says, well, our range is between 31 and 35, frankly, personally and professionally, it's not going to be worth your time to go back and try and take the ACT again to get up to a 34 or a 35, right? If you're within that range, you're typically doing okay for that institution, all right? So that matters to an extent. Also, admissions officers spend about 5 seconds looking at the SAT scores when we're really spending about 20 to 30 minutes with an application, getting to read you and know you and learning more about you through your essays and so on and so forth. So think about it that way, all right? So you don't need to take the SAT 5,000 times. Other things that we're looking at on the application include extracurricular activities. I know a lot of you are probably very involved, or your students are very involved in different types of activities, either here at Green Hope or elsewhere. And I do want to clarify what an extracurricular activity is. A lot of students say, well, it's definitely something that I'm doing at my high school. It's a club at my high school. That's what it is. But I'm really involved in my church. Am I allowed to list that? Yes, absolutely. Extracurricular is just that. Extra, outside of or in addition to, curricular, your curriculum, meaning your classes. So what are you doing outside of class? It could be a club here at Green Hope. It could be a sport here at Green Hope. It could be a club sport out in the community. It could be a religious organization. It could be volunteering with a community-based organization. It could be maybe you're a single parent. And I've seen this several times, and you've got 3 kids, and the youngest one is 6 years old, and then the middle one is 10 years old, and then you've got the high school senior, and you're working 2 jobs to try and keep things together at home, and that oldest kid is the one who's driving younger siblings to school and picking them up and cooking them dinner and helping them with their homework. They're basically playing the other parent, right? That's a lot of responsibility. We should know about that on an application. Maybe you're not a single parent. Maybe you have a 2-parent home. Maybe you've got a lot of resources that you can provide to your children, but they're deciding to do something else with their time because they have that flexibility. That's also wonderful. So based on your situation and what you have available to you, what are you choosing to do with your time? How are you spending that time? However you want to spend it, totally fine with us, whether it's a part-time job, it's dancing, it's doing theater, it's doing mock trial, whatever it is fine. My key bit of advice here, is keep in mind that if your student is applying to a lot of top institutions, that means a lot of top students will also be applying to those institutions along with yours. So when a student says, I'm the student body president and captain of the volleyball team, I say, great, what does that mean for you? Because we're going to get literally thousands of student body presidents and captains of several sports teams applying to schools like UNC Chapel Hill, Duke, Wake Forest, and so on and so forth, right? Harvard, Princeton, and Yale, absolutely. Everyone's one of those. And then some, times like 5, right? There's a student body president of another school. What? Yeah. Good, you laugh, that's a joke, okay. Total joke, all right, good, there we go. Trying to break the ice a little bit. So what is it that you are doing with that? For example, not all captains of sports are created equally. And in fact, a few years ago, I was reading 2 applications back to back. They were from rival high schools in Gastonia, North Carolina. Which was really funny. I'm from Charlotte, so Gastonia was right outside my area, so I sort of knew where it was, and I was newer in admissions. This was several years ago. But I was reading the 2 applications, and the first applicant said, I'm the captain of the soccer team at my high school. And I thought, okay, great, that's great. And I continue reading the application, and I'm looking over all the other activities that the student's done, and so on and so forth. That's fabulous. Then I come over here and I read this application, and I didn't think about it until I got to this application that, these are rival high schools, they know each other, because this student said, I'm the captain of the soccer team at my high school. And I thought, they know each other, they probably played each other, because they're rivals. I bet they hate each other, how cool is that, right? So I'm reading this application, and the student says, I'm the captain of the soccer team at my high school. As the captain, I show up at practice 30 minutes early and stay an hour late to set up and take down before and after practice and run through the next day's plays with the coach. I started a mentorship program between the JV and varsity team because girls are really mean, and I was noticing some bullying going on between the 2 teams and some hazing almost, and I wanted to cut that out, and I realized once you get to know someone, that cuts out, right? You learn about the humanity of a person, all of a sudden you're not nearly as cruel to them, we hope. And I also lead the team on 3 different service initiatives every year. Pretty great. This captain didn't tell us any of that. This captain did. This captain over here, that captain could have done all of that. But because they didn't tell me, I can't make an assumption that they're doing everything this captain is. Captains are created differently. Members of clubs are created differently. Part-time jobs are created differently, right? All of that is different. So it's your student's responsibility to explain what it is they've actually done. Parents, think about when you're writing a resume to apply for that fantastic job. You use action words. Right? You talk about numbers. What actual change did you make happen in that company or wherever you work, right? Same thing with applying to college. Now, you don't need to feed 5,000 hungry people and give every sad person a puppy and cure cancer. That is not what I'm saying. And I am sorry that the college admissions industry is making your student feel that way. That's not fair, and that's something we are working on. We're not necessarily looking for a Pulitzer Prize winner. You don't have to have solved the HIV crisis, right? That's not what I mean. But I mean, if you're going to say, I'm a member of the Spanish club at my high school, and I'm a member of the Spanish club at my high school, and what that means is I do about 30 hours of community service, and I help tutor a student whose first language is Spanish, and they're learning English. Those are 2 different things to me, right? So what are you actually doing? That's what you got to help guide your student on. And parents, you remember everything. Students are going to forget what they did in 9th grade. You will not. Your brain is a steel trap. Or if you're anything like my mother remembers everything I ever did and has a record of it somewhere, right? So parents, part of your role is helping students recall what it is that they actually did. That's a great way to be involved in the application process, okay? Don't write the list for them, remind them, nudge them a little bit every so often, okay? So that's gonna be a great way for you all to be involved. Again, you don't need to have 5,000 activities. That's the other thing. On the Common Application, which is what many institutions take, there are 10 lines for activities. Your students should not feel like they have to fill out all 10 lines or else they've done something wrong. That is not true. Some of the strongest resumes I've seen have had only 3 or 4 lines filled out. Some of the weakest resumes I've seen have had 10 plus a supplemental resume listing a whole bunch of other one-time things, all right? So quality over quantity. That's what we mean here. Whatever the activity is, totally fine with us. All right, let's talk about essays. A lot of institutions will require essays, some institutions don't, but even if the institution doesn't, oftentimes if you're interested in being reviewed for a scholarship at that institution, they will have a supplemental essay. Keep in mind that essays are just a chance for admissions officers to get to know the student. Some institutions will have interviews as part of their process. UNC Chapel Hill does not because we don't want to get to know your student, but because last year we got 41,000 applications for admission, and we believe in treating all applicants in the same way, which would mean 41,000 interviews, which would mean we would have no time to actually read your application, and we get a decision to you maybe by this December if you had applied last year, right? So that's why we do not do interviews as part of our process. Some institutions do. If they say that it is an optional interview, do it. If they say it is a recommended interview, that's code for required. So go and do an interview if they offer an interview, okay? For other institutions, though, the essays are sort of like one-sided interviews. And these are just chances for the admissions officers to learn something about the student that they're not going to get from the rest of their application, or for the student to go a little bit more in depth into an area that they didn't really get to expand upon so much in their application. And with the essays, keep in mind they're not academic essays. The reasons why I think so many students struggle with writing essays and get so nervous, I mean, one, writing is scary, especially when your audience is some anonymous blank person behind the white page on your computer screen who you don't know. It's just people like me. I think we're friendly and we're polka dots, you know, I think I'm approachable. And so don't worry, we're nice people, okay? We were all 17 and we'll read your essays with sympathy, certainly. But the other thing that's frightening is that students don't have a lot of practice writing in the way that we're asking them to write. English teachers in high school tell students not to use I, me, we, you, us. Don't use the pronouns, right? That's a research paper, a third-party paper is not the place to put that in, right? You're supposed to be the anonymous academic. When you apply to college, though, when your students writing these essays, it is all about them, and they absolutely should use those pronouns. They absolutely should talk about themselves. The focus is them, not some third-party idea, right? And that can be hard. Students don't journal anymore. They might do vlogs or blogs, or they text their friends all the time, but it's not consistent writing, right? Parents, maybe you wrote a journal, so writing this way might be a little bit easier for you, but it is going to be a challenge for students. Please do not write the essay for your students, of course. However, it's okay to coach them a little bit on how to write about themselves. What do you think? What is your opinion? What do you care about? What do you think they need to know about you, hon? Right? And then let your student write. That can be intimidating, I realize, but it's also very freeing to be able to write just all about yourself. This is one of the few times in their life they really get to sit back and reflect on who they are and share those pieces of themselves with someone outside of their family in a really authentic way. So that's what we're hoping students do. That's really the point behind the essays. Of course, proofread. Keep in mind if your student's writing this if their student is writing this on an iDevice, an iMac, an iPhone, an iPad, or whatever thing is, and there's an autocorrect feature, please remind them to proofread their essays after it has been autocorrected. It will not autocorrect to what they think it has autocorrected it to. Okay, I've read some horrifying things, all because of the autocorrect feature. So, make sure that your students actually proofread these essays, all right? Which is a no-brainer, I realize, but a lot of students write them at the last minute and don't think about it. So spending some time with that's going to be really important. And again, we're just trying to get to know students. A couple of UNC's prompts, for example, what do you hope will change about the place where you live? Tell us about a peer who you find inspiring, because culturally for some students it's inappropriate to talk about yourself, so that's their outlet if they want to talk about someone else. It still reflects a lot on them. Let's see, what's another thing? What aspect of your world and your perspective do you think will contribute most to the UNC student body? What is that? Whether it's a type of diversity, I mean, in essence it's a diversity question, but a lot of people think about diversity as race and ethnicity. That's one type of diversity out of all the different types of diversity. So what is it about that student? How are they a little different? And they are different, even if they don't feel different. They're the only one that's ever lived that set of life experiences ever in the world, and they're the only one who ever will. Who've had those exact set of people talking to them, people coaching them, so on and so forth. Experiences on the playground, that's it. So what is it about that experience makes them, and their brains, and their perspectives on the world a little different? The reason why colleges care so much about your students' perspective is because when you get into a classroom, especially at a top institution, and even at UNC with 18,000 undergraduate students, just under half of our classes have 20 or fewer people in them. 78% of our classes have 40 or fewer students. There are way more seminar-style classes than people realize. When you get into a seminar-style class, you learn through discussion. And if the class is not willing to discuss, and if the class can't think critically about themselves or share their perspectives on how different things in the world work based on what they've lived, that class is not going to work. And it's going to be insanely boring for you and for the other people in the room, right? That's why that matters. That then leads me into teacher recommendations. Some schools require just one. UNC, for example, requires just one. Some schools require two. Some schools require two and say, and that is the max. You can only send in two, any others will not be reviewed, and so on and so forth. For many schools, you are welcome to send in supplemental letters. That's totally fine. But for the one letter of recommendation from a teacher who's taught your student while they've been here at Green Oakland School or at another school if you moved and transferred in, the teacher's perspective is really giving us a sense, the teacher's perspective is very important because it gives us a sense of what that student is like as a person, another view of a third-party view of this human being that we're trying to get to know, and what they're like as an academic. So we're going to have a lot of really nice people apply. Every letter of recommendation says that the student's a really nice person. In my 8 years, this is now my 9th year reading letters of recommendation for UNC, I've only ever read 2 blatantly negative letters of recommendation. That's it. 2 where they said, I absolutely do not recommend this student, don't take them. I don't want to do that to you, UNC. This is the Regina George of our school. They're mean, right? So it was pretty intense. And another letter that said the student cheats regularly in my class and I can't catch them, so there's nothing on record in the system, but I know that they're cheating. Here are letters from other teachers who also agree that they're cheating, right? None of you in here are cheating, I'm assuming. I know that to be true, right? None of you are cheating. So none of you will have that problem. That said, I also read a lot of letters. That's only 2 out of the 1,000. I also read a lot of letters that are positive, but not really helpful. So the student who's a really nice student, who raises their hand, who hands in their homework on time, and who's very polite, that is great, but that is every single applicant to a top institution in the United States, right? So just learning that is not going to give us any additional perspective on the student. The student who's really nice and polite, raises their hands in their homework on time and all of that, and who's asking questions that other students aren't asking, or who has really taken control of their situation. You know, they failed the first exam, but that student came in on their own and said, I need help, I don't know what I'm doing, help me study, what do I do, how do I do this, and really clawed their way up to a B, or whatever it may be, right? That understanding that extra sense about a student, understanding what it is that that student has done in that room to make that classroom better or to grow as an intellectual. That's what we're looking for in a letter of recommendation. So the teacher who likes your kid, that's great. The teacher who likes your kid and who has worked with that kid in a different way and who has worked with your student to really help them develop and grow, or the student who's helped that teacher develop and grow because they're forcing that teacher to work harder to teach someone as bright as them, right? That's the letter that we're looking for, okay? Just one. One really strong letter is 5,000 times better than 5 okay letters that say that you're a nice person. Keep that in mind, all right? Once you get up to a certain number of letters, you also begin to look desperate. None of you are desperate, so don't be desperate, all right? So don't send in 5,000 letters of recommendation. The record we got was 86. Don't do that. I opened that application on January 15th, 2010. It was a nightmare. I shrieked and I closed it immediately. And I said, I'll come back to that later. Oh my God. It took me 3 hours. Don't do that, okay? So that is a no. 1, maybe 2. If you really got something that you want to tell us and you feel like someone else can do it, sure, 3. Some institutions will only review a certain number and that's it, okay? And then finally, when it comes to applying, there are different deadlines that you can apply to. There's typically an early deadline, and there's a regular deadline. There are different types of early deadlines, different types of regular deadlines. Some schools have early decision. That is a binding decision deadline. So if you apply early decision and you get in, you have to go. You cannot apply to, well, you should not, don't apply to 2 early decision schools. Because if you get into both, you have to go to both. That is physically impossible. We have not split the human genome like that yet, okay? Not after you've been out of the womb, all right? So, we're not going to go in that direction. And it's a big ethics problem when that happens, all right? You can apply to early action schools, more than one of those. We offer early action. We do not offer early decision. Early action at some institutions means if you apply, you get a better chance of getting in. We're more likely to take you. We're trying to get most of our students from this early deadline, and so on and so forth. At other institutions, they say, it's just a little bit earlier, that's it. Then there's a regular decision deadline. You can apply to that, but whichever one you want just helps us split up the work, right? At UNC, technically, according to the numbers, if you apply early action based on historical data, you are more likely to be admitted. That said, we are wanting to admit the best students that apply, and for the last 15 years, the strongest students tend to apply early. So it makes sense that we will take the students that are strong when they apply. Why would we deny a really strong student when historically, again, 15 pretty solid years of data shows that these second deadline students, some of them are going to be strong, but many of them will not be. Why would we take a less competitive student when we could have taken a really competitive student early? This is also a dilemma that other institutions face. This is why institutions will defer students sometimes. What that means is typically you've applied early, and you're hoping to hear, right? You're hoping to get in, and then they send you a decision that says, thank you so much for applying. We have chosen to defer your decision from early action to regular decision. Please send us your grades or whatever follow-up they may need. What that means is that your application is picked up and put in the regular decision applicant pool. So you're reviewed all over again. So the review continues for your application. Common reasons across all universities why students might be deferred. One, they're worried about space and they have an early decision deadline. They've already filled a certain number of spaces. They want to see how competitive you are down the road. Two, sometimes institutions just want to look at what their second deadline pool looks like, whether they have an early decision deadline or not. Three, maybe you were a really strong student in 9th and 10th grade, and then you got into 11th grade and you went from all A's to some B's. So not just some B's, but all B's. But you've got a really strong schedule coming in your senior year, and that institution wants to see, can you pick it back up and get over this hump, right? That often happens when you get into your junior year. So they will oftentimes request your mid-year grades in your senior year. That will be a very important part of the review, and so on and so forth. So we will do deferrals because we want to see what the rest of the pool looks like. We want to see what mid-year grades look like. There are all sorts of reasons why we defer students. Some years, we're able to take a lot of students that are deferred. Other years, we take almost none of the students that are deferred. It depends on the competitiveness of the second deadline, and that's going to be true at any institution that you're looking at, all right? One thing to keep in mind for students choosing whether they should to apply either early or regular, take a look at scholarship provisions and considerations. At UNC, for example, we do offer some merit scholarships to students. The vast majority of those are awarded to early deadline students, early action students. We also have a great program called Excel at Carolina, and that's 15 different opportunities, including the honors program, assured admission into the Keenan Flagler School of Business, assured admission into the School of Information and Library Science, assured admission into some dual degree programs, $5,000 to study abroad this summer after your sophomore year, some research fellowship programs, a few other scholars programs that have a monetary award. The vast majority of those are awarded to early action students, all right? So I always say if you're ready to apply early at any institution, go ahead and apply early, unless the only early deadline they offer is early decision, and you don't know if that's where you want to go. That's fine. And oftentimes, schools that have an early decision deadline and a regular decision with nothing in between, it's perfectly fine for you to apply regular. It's unreasonable for an institution to believe that they are your absolute dream for their entire life and you'll immediately go. That is the case for some students. That's not necessarily the case for others, and institutions can't assume that, okay? So that's the overall application process, things to think about. All of these things are things to start to think about now. The more you begin thinking through, what activities am I doing? Do I actually like this? Is there something I've always wanted to try? Now is my chance. Let me add that in. Let me drop this stuff I don't care about. If you have activities on your resume that you don't care about, you can tell in the way you write about it, and it looks very shellish and fake, right? Like a shell, there's no meat to it, right? So make sure that now's the time to get rid of those. Now's the time to begin practicing journaling. Time to write personally, right? Now is the time. Now is the time to think about teachers that you might want to ask to write a letter of recommendation for you. Give them a lot of lead time. Ask them at the very beginning of your senior year, if not at the very end of your junior year before you go home, right? For summer break. So that's why thinking about this now, you don't have to do it all right now, but thinking about this now is really going to help you set up your application for later on.